The people of Madagascar began voting on Friday in a presidential election they hope will end a 4-year political crisis. Hopes are high that a credible vote will also help rebuild investor confidence to mend an economy crippled after President Andry Rajoelina seized power in a 2009 coup. It's the first vote on the island after upheavals triggered by protests and mutinous soldiers drew sanctions against the island. This also prompted donors to freeze crucial budget support. Election officials at one primary school in the capital, Antananarivo, showed the first voters and political party representatives plastic ballot boxes before sealing the containers and kicking off the voting process. Well, it's been a rocky road to Madagascar's elections following 4 years of political turmoil and economic isolation. Voters are hoping the polls can usher in a new era. It's also a major test for the region. CCTV's Clementine Logan has more.
March 2009, an island nation plunged into chaos. After weeks of violent protest, former disc jockey Andry Rajoelina seized power. The one-time mayor of the capital, Antananarivo, claimed his rise to power was the popular will, and he promised a better future.
I proclaim the end of dictatorship, the waste of money in public finances, the lies and false promises, the exclusion and self-serving thoughts which have for a long time strangled our political life.
The man he ousted, Mark Ravalomanana, claimed he was still in charge.
I am still the president of Madagascar, and I will work with all parties interested in a peaceful outcome. I don't know exactly when I'm back. It's after a few weeks, I'll be back in Madagascar, sure, in confidence.
But he later fled to South Africa, where he remains in exile. The international community branded Rajoelina's takeover a coup. Madagascar was suspended from the African Union, economic sanctions followed, and the island became increasingly isolated. Regional body, the Southern African Development Community, sought to defuse the crisis, but Rajoelina and Ravalomanana were reluctant to give ground. Their standoff has delayed the election 3 times, most recently when Rajoelina and Ravalomanana's wife insisted they would run. International pressure forced them to relent. They're now backing some of the 33 candidates in the running. If all goes well, the African Union has pledged to reinstate Madagascar after the poll. It's called on the international community to provide financial and logistical support for a smooth vote. Many here are hoping this will mean a brighter chapter in the island's history. There's talk Rajoelina may seek a major role in any government that's formed. For Ravalomanana, the future's less certain. In his absence, he was sentenced to life for the death of protesters during the 2009 coup. Clementine Logan, CCTV.
Well, as we've seen there, it's crunch time for the island of Madagascar. Voters head to the polls to pick one of the 33 presidential hopefuls. Now, for the latest on the day's events, I'm now joined by Clementine Logan, live from the capital, Antananarivo. Clem, a lot hinging on this election being deemed free and fair. So far, what have you seen today?
Well, so far, Famida, from what we've seen, things have been pretty orderly and peaceful, although we have just received an unconfirmed report of 1 death in poll-related violence in the south of the country. We'll be bringing you more details as and when they emerge. Nevertheless, 7 million people going to the 20,000 polling booths across the country. We've been to 2 of them, one in the capital, Antananarivo, and one quite far outside. And what we saw were calm, orderly lines, people waiting patiently to cast their ballots. Things got a little bit more exciting in the morning when transitional leader Andry Rajoelina came to cast his ballot, declining, of course, to say who that was for or whether he'd be seeking a government position through that candidate if they reached the second round. But he praised Malagasy people's patience, and he said that he hoped that this would mark a calm and peaceful end to the crisis which began in 2009. Now, as you mentioned, a lot's hinging on this election. If Madagascar is going to regain that international support support that it needs to get back on its feet, then these elections have to be deemed credible and transparent. We've seen around 800 international monitors deployed across the country. I'm actually now joined by one of them. I'm joined by Mr. Jonas, UNDP Deputy Representative, who's been monitoring these elections today. I'd just like to get an idea of your impressions of how the day's gone so far.
Yeah, my impressions are very good. It has so far been moving very smoothly. We've seen long queues since the early hours of the morning, and we've gone around a dozen polling centers, and things are moving smoothly, peacefully.
And the UN representative to Madagascar, Fatma Samora, has said that with so many candidates in the running, it's likely that the election result could be contested. What measures are in place to ensure that this doesn't escalate into any potential violence?
Yeah, all candidates are encouraged to contest through legal means, and we have in place the special electoral code that has been capacitated to handle every cases that may arise to them. Also, we have conducted a number of training to make sure we have in communities people that will help handle electoral violence at community level if they arise. I mean, we have deployed these people from the civil societies, and then the armed forces and the police are also trained to respect human rights and people's rights in case they have to maintain peace and order during this period.
And has anything given you a cause for concern that you have seen today at all?
Not at all, but we saw few people that did not find their names in the list. But we don't think this is going to be a major concern, as we find out that these were very few people that could not find their names on the list. But so far, according to what we've seen in a number of polling stations, I don't think there is any major concern so far.
So with the second round looking likely, are these the types of problems that could be rectified?
Of course, I think after this first round, we're going to draw lessons, and since we are supporting the Senate technically, the UN is providing the technical support to Senate and also the logistical support to make sure everything is in place for smooth elections that meet the international standard. We're going to draw some lessons. If there is anything to improve, we're going to do that before the second round.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Mufwatiye, UNDP Deputy Representative. Now, there have been several appeals made by officials monitoring this election, asking for this to be a calm day, one that's peaceful. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
We are confident, but we cannot say that everything will happen smoothly, because this is an election that would put an end to close to 5 years of crisis, with a lot of challenges in all sides. And especially we have 33 candidates, and each of them thinks he is a favorite, and he has all the qualities and the skills to be the future president of the country. So definitely people will be contesting the votes, and this we are ready to prove them by legal means that everything went in a transparent manner.
Madagascar maintenant, ça fait déjà.
It's been a very long time since Madagascar held an election, and the lives of people here have gotten harder. So we're keen to end the transition. But of course we can't just bring it to an end however we want. It needs to be done in a democratic manner, and that's done through elections. So I ask the Malagasy people to make sure the elections take place in a correct way that respects the law.
Manière démocratique qui puisse exister, c'est de passer par les élections.
Well, Famida, polling booths in Madagascar are set to close at 5 p.m. local time, and we expect to see those votes collected throughout Friday night into the early hours of Saturday. They'll be collected and processed at the Independent Electoral Commission here in the capital, and we expect to start getting an idea tomorrow morning of who might, among these 33 candidates, be leading the race in this first presidential round.
All right, thank you very much. Clementine Logan there in Antananarivo, the Madagascan capital, bringing us the latest from those polls on that island. Now, stay with Africa Live when we return later in the day with full updates on that continuing story. It's time now for a quick break. When we come back. DR Congo troops battle M23 rebels in fresh clashes in eastern Congo. And it's relatively calm in Mogadishu as residents converge in social places despite suicide attack fears. Welcome back. The International Criminal Court Appeals Chambers declined to excuse Kenyan Deputy President William Ruto from continuous attendance at his trial. In a majority decision, the court overturned an earlier ruling that conditionally excused Ruto from being present during the sessions. Ruto, who's accused of orchestrating a wave of violence after Kenya's contested 2007 presidential election, wanted judges to agree that he need only attend the opening and closing sessions of his trial in The Hague, as well as hearings at which victims testify. The decision puts the courts at odds with the Kenyan government and the African Union, which have asked for the trials of Ruto and President Uhuru Kenyatta to be moved nearer to home or be postponed. The Kenyan government announced on Tuesday the commencement of the repatriation of refugees to their homes. Kenya is home to the largest refugee population in the world, over 500,000 people, mostly from war-torn Somalia. Interior Cabinet Secretary Joseph Olelenku says the decision is based on national security and the process will be carried out in a humane manner with the help of UN agencies.
We have welcomed with open arms refugees fleeing from insecurity in neighboring countries. But as it turned out, some of these refugees have abused our hospitality and kindness to plan and launch terror attacks from the safety of refugee camps. This cannot and shall not be allowed to continue anymore. Majority of refugees are from Somalia, a country that is now experiencing relative peace thanks to the government of Kenya and AMISOM forces. Because of the returning calm in some parts of the Federal Republic of Somalia, the process of repatriating Somali refugees has started. The Kenyan government is working closely with the government of Somalia and UNHCR to ensure that the repatriation process is as smooth and humane as possible.
DR Congo's M23 rebels have clashed with government troops near the eastern city of Goma. This is the first heavy fighting reported in nearly 2 months. An M23 military commander told Reuters news agency that its forces were attacked at 4 a.m. local time, around 15 kilometers north of Goma. The intense fighting is said to be ongoing. The resumption of hostilities comes days after peace negotiations broke down in the Ugandan capital, Kampala, triggering a military build-up on both sides. This is the second time in 3 months that peace talks have stuttered and combat has broken out between the DRC army and the 20-month-old rebel movement. Now, a sense of normalcy has returned to Mogadishu, Somalia's once war-ravaged capital. Amid the ruins, residents are beginning to rebuild their lives. Street lamps now light up some of Mogadishu's battle-scarred roads as hotels, restaurants, coffee shops and supermarkets spring up in the city. But despite the newly found freedom, Al-Shabaab Islamist militants continue to make sporadic attacks threatening the city's fragile peace. Susan Mongeli reports.
After decades of conflict, the streets of Mogadishu, Somalia's once war-torn capital, are beginning to come alive again. Many overseas Somalis are returning after fleeing during years of fighting. Their money has spawned art venues and sports clubs. But according to some residents, despite the calm, life is becoming more expensive. Prices are being pushed up by the richer returnees.
It was violent before, but life was cheaper then. These days, prices are really high.
Still, rebuilding a life that many in the world take for granted is a slow and often imperfect process. Militants Al-Shabaab still control swaths of the countryside and some towns and have launched several attacks on the city since 2011. Last month, they showed their reach by striking a Kenyan shopping mall. But residents of Mogadishu appear determined to enjoy their newfound freedom.
Mogadishu is on the way to recovery. There are so many places where young men and women can chat and relax at any time, day or night, that did not exist for the last 23 years.
A children's park has also been opened with a pool where children can swim and play.
We did not have children's play parks in the city because of insecurity, but now we have places that our children can play and swim and even ride electric trains.
Reminders of the fragility of the gains are, however, always present. A suicide bombing closed the National Theatre after it briefly reopened last year. And in June, 22 people were killed when Al-Shabaab gunmen stormed a UN base in the capital. But at the newly established Mogadishu gym, Al-Shabaab threats do not dampen the spirits of those seeking fitness.
A lot of young and old men and women come regularly to Mogadishu gym because they are coming to lose weight. There were no well-equipped gyms in the city before this one.
While Mogadishu residents enjoy relative peace and calm, the government still has to rely on an African peacekeeping force whose control in the nation of 10 million barely extends beyond the capital. Many Somalis in the rest of the country are still waiting for the peace dividend Mogadishu enjoys. Susan Mongeli, CCTV.
To Nigeria now, and the next installment in our series of special reports from the road to Maiduguri. The stretch takes the CCTV team into Damaturu, a city that suffered some of the bloodiest Boko Haram violence. But even amid the trouble for many people, business continues. Robert Nagila has more.
It had been a remarkably quiet road out of Bauchi. Then, near the state line, we pulled into this. A market that runs for 2 kilometers along the highway. Thousands gather here every weekend, and just about every demand is catered for. For all the troubles in this area of late, the markets are always busy.
Well, it's pretty much been a straightforward trip, apart from the scorching heat. Perhaps of surprise is that there's a lot more traffic on this particular section of the road as opposed to, for example, Jos and Bauchi.
But as we leave the market behind, there's a marked change. Clear evidence of the lack of development many say is at the root of instability. Much of Yobe State has no electricity or other basic services. Jobs too are scarce. There's no shortage of roadblocks though, and the searches are intense. It's a relief to finally get off the road and into our destination.
We are now entering Damaturu city.
This though is no ordinary city. At almost every turn, the military sealed off the roads. Damaturu is more like a sprawling fortress. Robert Nagila, CCTV, Damaturu, Nigeria.
Let's now go to Rama for the latest business news.
Thank you very much, Famida. Here's what's coming up in business.